The royal gathering had been planned down to the final greeting, but when Prince Harry arrived without Meghan Markle, one carefully prepared place remained empty. Palace officials offered no explanation, guests avoided the subject, and Harry's tense expression suggested the real story was already slipping beyond his control. For weeks, Meghan's expected return had been discussed in guarded conversations across the royal household. Her arrival was supposed to carry meaning far beyond a simple family appearance. It would suggest that old wounds were healing, that private anger had cooled, and that Harry and Meghan were prepared to step inside the royal world once again. Yet Harry entered alone, and within moments, the absence beside him became more powerful than his presence. Nothing was announced. Instead, the palace moved quietly. A chair connected to Meghan's position was removed. Security officers adjusted their movements. A formal introduction was shortened without explanation. Staff members who had prepared for 2 arrivals began behaving as though only one had ever been expected. The changes were smooth, almost invisible, but Harry noticed every one of them. He tried to remain composed. He offered polite greetings, exchanged careful words, and carried himself with the controlled calm expected of someone born into royal ceremony. But around him, conversations softened whenever he approached. Senior figures watched him for a second too long. Others avoided looking directly at the empty space where Meghan should have stood. Then came the question Harry had known he could not escape. Will Meghan be joining us later? The words sounded harmless, but the silence that followed gave them weight. Harry paused before replying that she would not be attending. He gave no reason. He mentioned no travel delay, no illness, no family duty, and no emergency. His answer was so guarded that it created more suspicion than clarity. Some inside the household appeared unsurprised. They had quietly predicted that Meghan might never arrive, even while public preparations continued. Their certainty suggested that the tension had begun long before Harry crossed the palace doors. Someone knew the invitation carried conditions. Someone understood that a private demand remained unresolved. And someone may have expected Harry to face the consequences alone. The empty place was no longer simply a missing chair. It became a symbol of loyalty under pressure, public image protected at private cost, and a struggle over who still held control. Harry understood that every polite exchange could now become an interrogation. Every question might test what he knew, what he could admit, and what he had been warned to conceal. But the uncomfortable silence surrounding Meghan's absence had not begun that morning. It had started days earlier, when a private message from the palace placed Harry and Meghan before a choice neither of them could accept easily. The invitation appeared formal, respectful, and carefully worded, yet buried beneath its polished language was a condition Meghan reportedly saw as deeply humiliating. She could return to Britain, stand beside Harry, and face the royal family, but only if she agreed to rules designed without her consent. At first, the proposed appearance seemed like an opening. Harry and Meghan understood what their return could represent. One shared public moment might quiet months of speculation, soften the image of a divided family, and show that despite everything said and written, they could still stand together when the occasion demanded it. For Harry, it was a fragile chance to rebuild a bridge. For Meghan, it was a test of whether the palace had truly changed. Then the additional instructions arrived. They were not presented as threats. Nothing inside the document sounded openly hostile. The language was careful, polished, almost gentle. Yet every detail tightened the boundaries around Meghan's presence. Her arrival time would be fixed. Her entrance would be separate and closely managed. Her seat would be chosen in advance. The people she could approach, the conversations she could have, and the amount of public attention she would receive were all quietly controlled. There would be no unscheduled meetings with selected relatives. No private conversation could later be repeated. No unexpected remarks. no deviation from the agreed plan. Even moments that appeared spontaneous would have to remain within palace limits. Officials called it protocol. Meghan saw something else. To her, the conditions did not feel like protection. They felt like containment. She was not being welcomed back as Harry's wife, or as a woman returning to face a difficult family. She was being managed as a risk. Her voice, her movements, and even her silence had been assigned a place before she had agreed to come. Harry understood why she felt insulted. But he also knew what another absence would unleash. The questions would return. The whispers would deepen. Meghan would be accused of avoiding Britain, rejecting the family, or leaving him to face the monarchy alone. Their disagreement grew sharper. Harry argued that attending did not have to mean surrender. They could follow the rules, survive the day, and leave with their dignity intact. Meghan believed the appearance itself would be used as proof that the palace's version of reconciliation had succeeded. A senior royal advisor made the pressure unmistakable. Refusing these terms, Harry was warned, could damage future invitations and close doors that might never reopen. That warning hardened Meghan's resistance. Why should she return to an institution she believed had dismissed her voice, feared her independence, and rejected her account of what had happened? Even then, the decision was not final. Strict schedules and limited contact might still have been accepted. But another demand remained hidden beneath the language of protocol, one tied to Harry's oldest pain. Harry might have persuaded Meghan to accept strict protocol, limited appearances, and controlled contact, but the final condition transformed a difficult return into an emotional confrontation involving his family, his past, and the memory neither he nor Meghan was willing to surrender. One final request changed everything. Before Meghan could appear beside Harry, the couple were reportedly expected to make a private gesture of reconciliation, one that palace officials described as symbolic. But Meghan believed would erase years of pain and force Harry to abandon a promise connected to his mother. The demand was presented as a necessary step before the event. Harry and Meghan would be expected to acknowledge the authority of the senior royal household and demonstrate, in private, that they were prepared to return without challenging the palace's control. It may have involved a closed-door meeting, a written assurance, or a carefully arranged exchange designed to appear personal while serving a much larger purpose. The palace wanted certainty. No private conversation from the visit could later appear in an interview. No disagreement could be repeated in a documentary. No emotional exchange could become a chapter in another memoir. Every word spoken behind closed doors would remain there, protected by silence. To palace officials, this was security. To Meghan, it was surrender. She questioned why reconciliation appeared to require guarantees only from them. Why were Harry and Meghan expected to prove their restraint, while old briefings, private accusations, and unresolved grievances remained untouched? Why should they accept silence as the price of entry, when silence had already cost them so much? For Harry, the demand reached deeper. It pulled him back toward the memory of his mother and the promise he believed he had made to himself long ago: never allow palace tradition to bury pain simply because the truth was inconvenient. He remembered how royal acceptance often came with conditions. Stay quiet. Protect the institution. Endure the private wound so the public image survives. He could not ignore the pattern. Still, Harry argued that they could attend without giving away their dignity. A meeting did not have to mean forgiveness. A written assurance did not have to erase the past. They could enter, stand together, and refuse to let the palace define what their presence meant. Meghan disagreed. She believed appearances were the monarchy's strongest weapon. If she returned, smiled, and stood beside Harry, the image would travel further than any explanation. Her presence would be used as proof that the conflict had ended, that the institution had been cleared. and that every accusation now belonged to the past. As travel preparations continued, their private disagreement became more painful. Harry kept searching for compromise. Meghan grew quieter. There were moments when it seemed she had already made her decision, even while he continued hoping she might change it. Meanwhile, word of her expected attendance spread with suspicious confidence. Someone inside the palace allowed the expectation to grow, making any withdrawal appear deliberate and dramatic. The trap was complete. If Meghan attended, she risked appearing controlled. If she stayed away, Harry would face the judgment alone. By the night before Harry's departure, the argument was no longer about travel arrangements or palace etiquette. It had become a question of sacrifice, and when the final decision came, only one of them would board the flight to Britain. When Harry stepped onto British soil alone, the palace received the confirmation it had been waiting for. Meghan would not appear. Yet instead of ending the speculation, her absence turned Harry into the sole target of questions about his marriage, his loyalty, and the true reason she stayed behind. The attention shifted before Harry had even reached the gathering. Commentators studied the empty space beside him. Reporters repeated the same question in different forms. Had Meghan cancelled at the last moment? Had she ever intended to come? Or had the palace known all along that Harry would arrive alone? Official representatives refused to give a clear answer. They would not confirm whether Meghan's attendance had been formally approved, privately expected, or quietly abandoned days earlier. That silence created room for several explanations to spread. Some claimed family responsibilities had kept her away. Others blamed security concerns, scheduling difficulties, or Meghan's personal reluctance to return. But none of those stories matched the preparations Harry had seen. A position had been planned for Meghan. Security movements had been discussed. Introductions had been arranged. Her absence had forced last-minute changes that could not be explained by a casual misunderstanding. Harry knew it. Palace staff knew it. And the people watching him closely knew it too. The first direct question came quickly. Had Meghan chosen not to return because she felt unwelcome? Harry answered with caution. He spoke about personal decisions, family priorities, and the need to respect private circumstances. His words were controlled, but they revealed almost nothing. That only encouraged the next question. Was Meghan's absence a sign of trouble in their marriage? The change in Harry was immediate. The guarded calm hardened. What had begun as speculation about the monarchy was now reaching into his home, his loyalty, and the relationship he had spent years defending. He refused to take the bait, but his restraint carried its own tension. The senior royals offered no protection. No one stepped forward with a shared explanation. No statement closed the door on the rumors. Their silence left Harry exposed, and some inside the palace appeared to view his discomfort as the predictable cost of rejecting royal conditions. The pressure deepened when he was positioned near relatives whose relationship with Meghan had long been strained. Only then did he notice that the place prepared for her had vanished completely. The arrangements no longer showed any trace that she had once been expected. Harry stood inside a family structure he had known all his life, yet he had rarely seemed more isolated within it. The palace had expected him to repeat an agreed explanation. He hesitated because it was not the whole truth. Then, away from the public questions, a senior figure confronted him directly. Did Meghan refuse the invitation, or had the palace made it impossible for her to accept? Harry could continue offering careful answers to journalists and guests, but behind closed doors the palace demanded something more direct, and the truth about Meghan's no-show was finally about to emerge. The real reason Meghan stayed away was not a forgotten commitment, a travel problem, or a last-minute family emergency. She refused to return because the palace demanded silence, obedience, and a carefully staged reconciliation while offering no acknowledgement of the treatment she believed had driven her away. For Meghan, the decision became clear when she understood what the proposed return was really meant to achieve. It was not designed to repair trust. It was designed to protect the monarchy's image. Her appearance beside Harry would create the perfect public message. The conflict was over, the family had moved forward, and every painful accusation could now be pushed quietly into the past. But that peace would have been carefully prepared. Meghan would be expected to follow an agreed narrative. She could attend, smile, exchange formal words, and leave without challenging what the palace wanted the public to believe. She would not be free to answer difficult questions, defend her decisions, or correct any private briefing that appeared afterward. The event would offer her visibility without a voice. That, she believed, was the danger. Any closed-door meeting could later be described by palace sources as warm, healing, or successful. If she disagreed with that version, responding publicly would make her appear bitter and disruptive. Remaining silent would allow others to define the encounter for her. Either way, control would stay with the institution. She feared becoming a symbol rather than a person, a carefully placed guest whose presence would be used to declare that the old wounds no longer mattered. Harry asked her to reconsider. He knew what would happen if he returned alone. The questions would fall on him. Some would suggest Meghan feared Britain. Others would claim she disliked the royal family, had abandoned any hope of reconciliation, or no longer supported her husband when he needed her most. Meghan's response was emotional but firm. Returning under those conditions would betray everything they had said about dignity, independence, and the cost of remaining silent. She could not condemn palace control for years and then accept it the moment an invitation arrived. So Harry made his own painful choice. He would attend alone, preserve what remained of his family connection, and refuse to force Meghan into an appearance she believed was dishonest. He also knew the official explanations would sound weak. The real demands were confidential. Revealing them would ignite a new war. Hiding them would leave him carrying the suspicion. And there was a darker possibility. Palace insiders may have expected Meghan to reject the terms from the beginning. By presenting an invitation she could barely accept, they could appear generous while making her seem unreasonable. Her no-show was an act of resistance, but it was also a dangerous public relations gamble. Harry now understood the price of protecting her confidence. He would face the doubts alone. The palace could portray Meghan's absence as rejection. Meghan believed the invitation itself had never been genuine. The truth explained why Meghan stayed away. But it did nothing to protect Harry from what came next, because once the palace understood he would not publicly blame his wife, attention shifted toward testing how far his loyalty to her would go. For years, Harry had insisted that leaving royal life allowed him to protect his wife and children. Now, standing alone inside the institution he had challenged, he faced a cruel reversal. Defending Meghan could deepen the royal divide, while remaining silent made him appear abandoned, uncertain, and increasingly isolated. The questions from the public had been difficult, but the private remarks cut deeper. Relatives wondered aloud whether Meghan understood what Harry's return meant. This was not, they argued, an ordinary engagement. It was a rare chance to preserve his place within the family, and her absence had left him exposed at the very moment unity mattered most. Some framed it as a failure of support. They suggested a wife should have stood beside him, regardless of discomfort. Harry heard the judgment hidden beneath those words, but he refused to criticize Meghan. One careless remark could have softened the palace's attitude toward him, yet it would also have betrayed the woman whose confidence he had promised to protect. Instead, he became the messenger between two sides that no longer trusted each other. The palace questioned Meghan's intentions. Meghan questioned whether the invitation had ever been sincere. Harry carried each accusation across the divide, absorbing anger that neither side was willing to express directly. His resentment grew. Palace officials had offered Meghan a return under conditions they likely knew she would reject. Now they were treating her refusal as proof that she had never wanted peace. In quieter conversations, Harry was asked whether he truly supported her decision or had simply accepted it because he could no longer persuade her. Then came a more painful warning. If Meghan continued avoiding Britain, Harry's own connection to the country could weaken beyond repair. Every solo visit might reinforce the idea that his royal relationships survived only when his wife remained far away. That possibility unsettled him. By attending alone, had he protected a fragile family bond or strengthened the palace's power to separate him from Meghan whenever it suited them? A private message arrived from her during the event. Meghan reminded him why they had made the decision. They had refused to perform reconciliation while the deeper wounds remained untouched. Her words offered reassurance, but they also sharpened the contrast between the warmth of home and the cold formality surrounding him. Outside, the story was already forming. Harry was trapped between his marriage and the monarchy, unable to defend one without appearing to reject the other. Senior figures watched his every choice. Would he obey protocol, speak openly, leave early, or turn private resentment into public confrontation? Harry remained controlled, but the pressure was closing in. One private conversation with a close relative would soon reveal that Meghan's absence had changed more than the mood of the event. It had changed Harry's position inside the family itself. Harry had survived the public questions without betraying Meghan, but the most painful challenge was waiting away from the cameras, where a family member confronted him with an accusation he could not dismiss as gossip or palace strategy. Behind closed doors, the careful language disappeared. Harry was told that Meghan's absence had embarrassed the family, overshadowed the event, and confirmed fears that she would never accept royal compromise. His reply was equally direct, and what followed threatened to destroy the fragile purpose of his entire visit. The confrontation began with restraint, but the tension had been building for too long to remain polite. A senior member of the family accused Meghan of knowing exactly what her absence would create. By staying away, she had turned a royal occasion into another debate about herself, Harry, and the conflict that refused to disappear. Harry rejected that claim immediately. The palace, he argued, had created the crisis by attaching conditions to the invitation. Meghan had not refused a simple welcome. She had refused a return built around silence, controlled contact, and a public performance of peace that did not exist in private. The response was cold. Royal duty, Harry was reminded, had always required sacrifice. Personal discomfort could not be allowed to damage the institution. Generations had followed rules they did not choose because the crown depended on discipline. But Harry had heard that argument before. He challenged the belief that Meghan must continue proving her loyalty while the palace offered her no protection. She was expected to attend, remain quiet, and accept whatever explanation followed. Yet when damaging stories appeared or private details reached the press, no one stepped forward to defend her. The senior figure accused Harry of seeing every disagreement through Meghan's eyes. Old wounds returned without warning. Trust, media leaks, Diana's suffering. The decision to leave royal life. Each subject carried years of resentment, and every answer seemed to open another injury. Then the conversation shifted toward the future. Titles, family privileges, inheritance discussions, and access to royal occasions were mentioned in careful language. Nothing was threatened openly, but the meaning was clear. Cooperation could preserve Harry's remaining place. Continued resistance could narrow it. Harry reacted sharply when the discussion touched his children. Their connection to the royal family, he insisted, could not become leverage in a battle over obedience. The moment that boundary was crossed, the argument stopped being about Meghan's empty place. It became a struggle over who controlled Harry's future. Meghan's refusal had exposed something larger than one disputed invitation. The palace wanted authority over the terms of reconciliation. Harry wanted a relationship that did not demand submission. Neither side trusted the other enough to retreat. The conversation ended without agreement. The family members saw Meghan's absence as a deliberate political message. Harry saw it as protection from a system that had offered conditions instead of understanding. As he left, he knew the confrontation would not remain private forever. Once fragments escaped, the next awkward questions would no longer come from guests inside the palace. They would come from the entire world. By the time Harry reappeared in public, the visit had already changed. Meghan's empty place was no longer a mystery, it had become evidence in a larger battle over loyalty, control, and the future of the Sussexes. Meghan's absence lasted only one event, but its consequences reached far beyond the palace walls. Harry returned expecting difficult conversations. Instead, he left facing a darker possibility that every future invitation would force the same choice, and every choice would push him further from either his wife or his family. Before the visit had even ended, competing stories were already taking shape. Some claimed Meghan had stayed away out of fear. Others called it defiance. There were whispers of marriage tension, royal rejection, and a private battle neither side wanted to explain openly. The palace did not need to answer those claims. Silence worked in its favor. Every unanswered question allowed suspicion to grow around Meghan, while Harry remained trapped by promises he could not break. When he returned home, he carried more than exhaustion. He carried every question he had avoided, every accusation he had swallowed, and every private warning about what future resistance might cost. Meghan saw the visit as proof that the palace wanted compliance, not reconciliation. Harry could not entirely dismiss her conclusion. Yet he also understood the danger of staying away forever. Each missed ceremony could weaken his connection to Britain, his family history, and the royal world that had shaped him. Every solo appearance might create a pattern the monarchy would quietly prefer. Harry could return, but only without Meghan beside him. That possibility raised larger questions. Would Meghan ever attend another major royal occasion? What would happen at future family milestones, inheritance discussions, or ceremonies involving their children? Could the next generation maintain a connection to royal tradition if every invitation arrived wrapped in conditions? The no-show had exposed an unspoken rule. Reconciliation was possible, but only on palace terms. Harry now knew that every future visit would bring the same questions. Where was Meghan? Why had she stayed away? Did she refuse the family, or had the family refused to accept her without control? The emotional cost was impossible to escape. To protect his marriage, Harry risked losing pieces of home. To preserve his royal connection, he risked placing Meghan back inside the system they had left. Neither side had truly won. The palace avoided Meghan's uncontrolled presence, but created a public spectacle. Meghan protected her boundaries, but deepened the image of permanent distance. The empty place from the beginning now meant something larger. It had become the symbol of a family unable to agree on what peace required. And when the next invitation arrived, the price might be even higher. Harry could eventually be forced to decide not where he belonged, but which world he was prepared to lose. Meghan's empty seat may have disappeared when the gathering ended, but the questions it created remained waiting for Harry at every royal doorway, every family ceremony, and every future moment, when silence would no longer be enough.